far away from Madisonville, and there were a few times we played in football and all that, so I knew about where the area was. My closest friends, his dad was a pastor over here. I can't remember the name of the church, but if you may know him if you're from around this area, Bob Hendrick. Um, Will Hendrick was a classmate of mine, and we ran around together when they moved to Rockdale. He was the pastor of the church that I was attending. And anyway, I've been in the ministry, youth pastor. I was a youth pastor for 25 years. I know I only look 27. I started young, but the point is that I also grew up in church. I was the little kid that was crawling underneath the pews and doing all that good fun stuff, and having to sit up front because my mom told me to, or I was going to get in trouble later. I grew up in the church also, in a small country church outside of Rockdale, and it was one of those things. The doors were open. My family was there. We were the yard people. We cleaned the church. We had awesome potlucks. That's what I love about small churches. It's like you go to a small church and you have enough food to feed an army, but you go to large churches and it's like, okay, only take one chicken leg, and it's like, no, y'all need to have a lesson from the small church. I love smaller churches, smaller congregations, because it's like family. You know everybody. And whenever someone is not in their normal seat, you begin looking for them, and you'll drop them a message, or you'll drop by their house even. My daughter just mentioned over there, she's like, I like this church, it's small. And right now, I am a teacher at Stephen F. Austin Middle School in Bryan. And I also coach football, and then I coach basketball, a varsity basketball team at Steel Creek Christian Academy, if you know. And so I'm not on staff anywhere, and that was a difference for me and my wife. As long as she'd known me, I'd been on staff at a church, and we moved to Bryan because she got a job offer. And we typically would move for me, and we're just like, we need to be closer to my parents, closer to her parents, and her siblings live in Bryan in College Station. And so we were like, hey, let's go. And I've interviewed and tried for different youth ministry positions, but I think God has placed me in this school for a reason. It is a very dark place, and I say dark in the sense of lost. And after I worked in the special ed department, and after about a couple of days there, I told my wife, and her name's Jill, so it's real easy to remember. And I told her, I said, working at a church, you're just kind of there, and I mean, you're there, and you expect everybody to have a Christian attitude and to be a reflection. And I said, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm a light in a dark spot. And so just this last week, I was walking around the campus, and that's one of the things that I do. I work with autistic kids, and that's a blessing. It is amazing, and I love every day's a new day, and it is a blessing because I love my students, and one of the things I do is I go check in on other students, staying on task. Well, one of the things that I sat down at the table outside the restroom, because we monitor those as well. And one of my students from last year that I worked with, he sat down next to me and we started talking. And finally, he said, "Are you going to stay here, Mr. Reeves?" I said, "I'll stay here as long as God has me." And he looked at me and he said, "You're a religious person?" I said, "I'm not religious. I have a relationship with Jesus." And he looked at me and he said, "Me too." And it was just, once again, opened the door, was able to share just a little bit of Christ's love with this student. And I then told him, I said, "Hey, you ever have an issue, you need somebody to talk to, you need a break, my room's right there." And he said, "Yes, sir." And he's one of my football players as well. So it's been a blessing to get to be at this school, and it's a little different. But one of the things that happened with that was having a new position there's fear that comes along with that. And I'm going to take a little sidebar real quick. Whenever you talked about trusting in doctors, a verse in Psalms just popped in my head, and it said, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but I trust in the Lord, and I will trust in the Lord. And so that's kind of where we're going, but we're going to be talking about fear. And I have some fears in my life. I watched a scary movie when I was about 7 or 8 years old that I wasn't supposed to watch. So listen to parents when they tell you not to do that. And because of that fear, because of what that fear did to me, I did not go into my mom and dad's bathroom for years. And the reason why is because what happened in the movie, a scary scene reminded me of their bathroom. So I stayed out of their bathroom. They were probably happy for that part. But I was not going to go in there. But here's a fear that I have that's irrational. And I grew up and I watched this movie that has a shark in it. And a lot of y'all know what I'm talking about. It has an awesome little sound that goes with the shark. Do, 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 do. Okay? Well, because of that movie and because of Discovery Channel's Shark Week, I stay out of the ocean. I've gone on cruises. I've gone to the Caribbean, Bahamas area. I've gone to Cabo. I've gone down to Florida, and I'm like, step my feet in ankle deep, and I'm like, nothing's going to get me here. And this is as far as I want to go. After that, I've tried going, they say, oh, nothing happens, knee deep. And I'm like, no, I'm all right. I want to keep my legs. But the thing is that I've gone out in crystal clear water where I could see everything. And I was chest deep, and my heart's pounding. I have anxiety with that, and it brings in fear, and it's sad. It's irrational, I know, but that fear begins to control me and keep me from having and enjoying a good time in one of God's creations. And so that brings me to another fear that came up in my life, and I was in 7th grade. And back then, there was a radio station, Waco 100, I think is what it was called. And there was a girl named Vicky Hart or Valerie Hart that did requests and dedications every night. And it was a country music station, and I would listen to it. And there was a popular song that came out by George Strait called "I Cross My Heart." And I liked that song, but I also liked a girl. And so I got brave enough to call into the radio station, and I said, Vicky Hart answered the phone, or Valerie, I can't remember, Miss Hart, I'll say. She answered, and I said, yes, I would like to dedicate "I Cross My Heart" to this girl named Tamara. And I want to ask if you'll go out with me on the radio. And I'm like, in my mind, kind of like Christmas Story moment, where he has this vision that everybody's going to love what he does. In my mind, I'm like, I go to school next day. She's going to walk up and say, yes, I love you. And, well, needless to say, I go to school the next day, in my mind, hoping that she comes up to me. Her friend comes up to me and says, Tamara heard what you did. Never do that again. And that was it. So I was rejected, and that has caused a fear of rejection. I had a friend of mine growing up that I recently made the decision to follow Christ. I gave my life to Christ, and I was excited and pumped and fired up, and I went and told him about it. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. And his words were, I'm going to have more fun in hell than heaven. And I was like, and so that brought on a fear to share Christ. And that just totally crippled me in sharing Christ with others. And I let that go ahead, I let that get in my way whenever it came time when God was calling me to the ministry. I had fear of that I'm not good enough. Like the ability, or even as a person, I had a fear and listened to other people that were feeding into me saying, you'll never make any money doing that. You need to find something else. And I was scared, and I ran from that, until I got wise counsel. And then I surrendered to ministry, and life has been amazing since. But these fears can cripple us completely. They can rob us from things that God has for us. They can take over our lives and our hearts and our heads. They can cause us to freeze, give us anxiety, and give us worry. What are the fears in your life that are holding you back? Take a moment and just think about that. What are some fears in your personal life, whether they're sharks or whether it's something of like rejection? Maybe it's a fear of talking to somebody. What are some of those fears? What is it that's truly holding you back? What in your marriage that you may be having a fear about? What causes you to freeze? We're going to define this word fear, and that fear, and it says an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness or of danger, anxious concern of danger. But there's also the reverence and awe for God. There's a book by John Gordon. And if you're a reader, he has short. If you're not a reader, even he has short little books that 2-3 hours worth of listening to if you're a listener. And so, but he has a book called Energy Bus, and he says fear is a low, weak energy. It doesn't have a lot of strength, but we build it up in our heads. Yes, we are to have a fear, a reverence for God, but not the kind of fear that makes us exhibit to a control, not a fearful, scary fear, but it's a fear out of reverence. Proverbs 9:10 says this: the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. There's types of fear that cripple us, and we have anxiety, which is huge in for us today. I deal with students that have anxiety over. You could have a loud sound and it triggers. I could put a word on the board and it triggers that. And I'm not, if you deal with anxiety, you know what? God can be Lord of it, and he can use that. I want to say it, and it does not mean you're weak. It does not mean that there's anything wrong with you, but what it is an opportunity for you to let God shine through that anxiety. Does that make sense? All righty. But those fears that cripple us, those fears that make us feel weak, those fears that keep us from doing exactly what God has a desire and wants us to do, those are fears that are straight from the liar, the deceiver, Satan. Those are not from God. When you begin to be controlled by this fear, you're essentially saying this: my God is not big enough to overcome this. My belief in this fear is bigger than my faith in God. So I want to put my trust in him now. And let's be real and honest and open with ourselves as today. I hope that we will take this time and face some fears that we've had. And face those, and let's turn those over to God. It wasn't until I read a book called In the Pit on a Snowy Day. And it's by Mark Batterson, if you're, once again. But in 2 Samuel, we're going to go there, and we're going to read verse 23, or chapter 23, verse 22, or 20 and 22, excuse me. I'll give y'all a moment to read, to catch up, or to find that in your Bible if you need to, and this was a story I'd never heard before in all the years that I'd read the Bible, and I just recently got into I'll say a yearly thing of reading the Bible chronologically. If you have not done that, it is amazing, and it is mind-blowing to read it chronologically and see this thread from Genesis all the way to Revelation, this thread of Christ all the way through. And then seeing how it still is living today. But here it is in 2 Samuel chapter 20. 3, verse 20. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was a valiant fighter from Kabazil. If I've mispronounced these, you can put it on a $20 bill how to pronounce it, and I promise you I'll take care of it. But anyway, who performed great exploits. He struck down two of Moab's best men. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He was as famous as the three mighty men. If you haven't heard of, there was a group of men that David had, and they were called the mighty men. And there's different stories throughout David's time that he'll talk about them. But Benaiah is one that sticks out, especially that he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And you're like, okay, where's this going? And we're going to talk about that. The lion that we're going to talk about is that fear in your life. That fear in your life that is crippling or scaring you or keeping you from doing those things that I believe God desires for us to do or has a plan for you to do. And so the first thing that we must do is we must be willing to acknowledge the fear that we have. You've got to acknowledge that fear. You got to understand that in these times, they typically would not go about the task of chasing a lion as a single person, first of all. Second of all, just understand that what they would have done was they would have gone in a group of men, all armed and ready. They would have tried to corner this lion, and then they would have attacked it. Well, Benaiah chased this lion by himself. And with that, he went into a pit. That means he went one-on-one with this lion. He goes down into this pit, meaning there's probably very few ways to escape this. And he knew going into that it was either him or the lion. So let's think about it in our life. It's either us with God or the fear. Okay? We're gonna acknowledge and we're gonna face that. We're gonna take some time to look at that. Know that the fear you have, whether it be in your everyday life or when it comes to situations you face, is not just going to poof be gone like a lot of us tend to do. I was one that I'm so laid back. I'm just chill, is what they'd call it now. I'm just laid back. Things don't really get to me, and if you did me wrong, I'd blow it off and just think about, hey, you didn't mean to do that. I tell people that I naturally think people are good. I just look for the good in all people. And that's just me. That's the way God wired me. And I'm thankful for that because that keeps me from having a lot of judgments. But the point is that people can walk all over me at times. And I just, okay, no worries. I'm still alive. But the thing is that if someone had done me wrong or there is something bothering me, I would just put it in the back of my head and just ignore it. And what I found out is because of doing that, it affected me in other areas. And what happened was it ended up affecting me in my marriage. And so me and my wife, it was just like, oh, and then boom, there's a rough spot to where we were just not getting along. And we really couldn't figure out what the deal was. And I ended up personally, I went to counseling. And through counseling and through things that me and my wife did, we figured out what the issue was, and it was just that I would just ignore things, and that was a coping thing for me. And so we had to fix that. We had to get around and now it's amazing how whenever I turned something over to God, and how He has now used that to help me to help other people, and not to think something's wrong with you if you have an issue, and once again, that's something I get to work with now. But the thing is that give the fear its name. Let's be honest. Whatever it is that's giving you fear, whatever that fear is, acknowledge what it is and give it its name. If it's like a child. We give a name and we acknowledge who it is. And that's the same way with this fear. If it's a rejection or a fear of somebody at your work, or if it's something that brings up this anxiety that we talked about, that causes anxiousness or causes more stress, whatever that fear is, whatever that is that's holding you back and holding you down, let's give it its name and acknowledge what it is. Don't ignore it. Don't push it to the side, but let's look at it face to face. And we do that. Once you acknowledge the fear, you can know how to slay it. You know what you need to do. But I had to make a decision when he went into that pit. Do I go after it or not? Knowing that if he jumps the pit, everything would be changed forever. And some of us need to get in that pit today. Some of us need to face that and know that today is what we call a stake in the ground. That today will be a day that I'll never be the same, because I am gonna get through this by the power of God, and through God, we're gonna get through this. It could be a health concern. It could be a job. It could be whatever that fear is. Acknowledge it, and let's get through this. Think about how that fear has controlled you, robbed you of things God has placed before you, robbed you of blessings. Take hold of that, and let's slay it. In Isaiah 41:10, it says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Look at those things that God says. He says, "I am with you." And then he lists several things of "I will, I will, I will." He never once says that he's going to let you deal with it on your own. He never once says, you got yourself into this, now get yourself out. Because we can look all throughout Scripture and see how many times people have gotten themselves in situations. And we can look all throughout Scripture that God was there. And whatever it is that you're going through, God is there, and he wants to get you through it through him. But a lot of times we tend to want to do it by ourselves. We think that for us men, I'm gonna tell y'all something. Us men in here, we think that we're a man. We have this John Wayne syndrome to where we can get through it, and we're going to cowboy up, pull our bootstraps up, and get to it. But I'm going to tell you the truth. That can be one of the most damaging things in our lives. If we think that we can do it by ourselves. I am so thankful once again that God put a woman in my life for me to marry that loves me, and I will say this, loves me unconditionally in all of my ugliness and all of my mistakes. Because there were times in my life that I could never have gotten through it without her. And he put my helper beside me. I grew up watching John Wayne. I grew up riding horses, working cattle, and it was always, if you get thrown off, what do? Well, you know what? Sometimes you got to have help to get back on. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you need help to tighten that saddle. Because I know there were a few times that I was not strong enough, and my dad had to come tighten it for me. And that's the same thing, that you don't have to get through it by yourself. You look at the people that you're surrounded by this morning. They're in this place because God has put them here. Why? Because they are here to get in the foxhole with you. They are here to live life with you. This is a community. And we are here to love each other, build each other up, get each other through those hard times. And church, when someone comes to you with something, please, please love them. Don't pass judgment. Don't make a decision. Don't sit there and go, I'm here, and then go tell somebody else. I think that's one of the biggest things that's hurting our churches today. I'll get off that soapbox. Psalm 34, 4 says this, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from my fears. Crazy thing is that yesterday when I got a phone call, I was like, yes, I have sermon. I have ready to preach sermons, just to let you know. Most pastors do, and most ministers do, just in case. And I couldn't decide. I was like, God, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Here's the funny thing is that there were about 2 different ones I was trying to figure out. And that verse right there, I woke up singing that verse. And then I see that verse as I'm looking through the sermons. And I'm like, okay, God, here we go. This is it. So I sought the Lord, and he answered and delivered me from all my fears. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for the Spirit of God does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. He did not give us a spirit of fear. He did not give us something to be shy. He did not make us to be quiet, but he made us to be bold and gave us strength to share what he's done in our lives and to let other people know. But that also comes with this. He did not give us a spirit of being fearful of whatever it is that's causing us this fear. As a believer in Christ and a born-again believer, you have the power to stand over that. Why? Because you have the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords. You have Jesus on your side. And we know how the story ends. He ends with him winning. So we don't have that fear that we need to have. Hold on to these truths from God. Know that he has placed all this in your hand, and he has you in his hand. I love the passage that says, nothing can take us away. Nothing. And then after we acknowledge, after we slay the lion, slay the fear, we move on. We learn from it. When I was about 13 years old, and this is when I was dealing with feeling God calling me to ministry. Now, a little quick story is that I was in the front yard in the house I grew up in, and I had a little kiddie pool. And I was about 3-4 years old. My mom told me, and my family has told me multiple times, that I was baptizing kittens. And so I figured God was calling me at a very young age, and I just didn't answer. But the point is that, dogs go to heaven. We don't know where cats go, so we were trying to get them there. So the thing is that 13, 14 years old, I was feeling God calling me to ministry, and I was not listening at all. And that's young. Some of y'all may say that's young. It is. But I went to a prayer meeting with my brother and his wife, and they were a non-denominational church, and they would do praying over you, laying of hands, and anointing with oil. And this Hispanic guy that I could not understand a lot of his English because I just couldn't. And he gets up and he says, "We need to pray for you." I heard that clearly. And I was like, okay, sure. And so they all circled around me, and he began praying in the clearest English I've ever heard. But he was praying, and he said, he said my name, David, and he knew me because I'd been there. But the point is that he said, David, I feel God telling me that you're going to preach, and you're going to teach, and you're going to share Christ with others. In that same time, one of the struggles I was having is that I was having dreams that I was preaching, but somebody was trying to take my life. And so you see where that conflict, you see where I was having this inner conflict. Satan's like, yeah, you're going to do this, but I'm going to get rid of you. But then this guy speaks over me, and other people start praying similar prayers. I'm like, okay. And so I eventually did, but the point is that I was able to get through that fear because of these prayers. And press on towards the goal in life God has for you. Keep your focus on God and His direction. Joshua 1:9, we know this one. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I don't know how many history buffs we have, but if you ever heard of the Spartans, what they would do to the young men, what they would do is they would send them out into the wilderness essentially, and they would place them when they were of age to be a warrior. They would place them on this stump in the middle of this opening in the forest, and they'd place them there. And the thing is that they would give them nothing. No lights, no nothing. And the young men, young boys really, had to sit on this stump all night alone. And you know how it is if you've been camping and you hear all these noises and all that. Well, the thing is that he's sitting there and you know he's scared to death. He hears wolves howling. He hears all kinds of bumps in the night, and he's scared to death. But then morning breaks. And when morning breaks, he sees what is going on. And all the warriors of that group had surrounded him and were protecting him. That's the picture that God has for us, is that you may feel like you have nothing, but he has surrounded you with his hands. He has covered you. He has taken care of you, and he is protecting you. And that's exactly what it is. Whatever it has been that's causing you fear, anxiety, if you give it to him and let him take care of it, let him slay it, he's going to hold you. And you're encompassed by him, and he's protecting you. Now, the reality is that we tend to go back. We tend to forget that. And when we tend to forget that, and we don't put our trust in God, we begin to feel overwhelmed. So here's your reminder. When you feel overwhelmed, check back and see where your trust is. When you're feeling anxious, stop, take a few breaths, and figure out where your trust is. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work with it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. In Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good. Let's not become weary in doing the good that God has for us. For the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And so we're going to say, what fear is crippling you today? Maybe it's like I said, maybe it's health. Maybe it's job. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's something that irrationally you have created. But what fear is crippling you and keeping you from doing the work of God, letting him use you? I'm going to ask everybody to just bow your heads and ask the musicians and worship team to come up.